Hi, my name is Will, and this is Dyslexia Tutoring. And today I want to talk about compensatory strategies, entrenchment, and reading disability. And to talk about it, I have this little image here, and the boy here is reading a book. And you can imagine inside the book is exactly the same as outside the book. So it has a word dog. So the boy's looking at the word dog, and the mom says, "What does it say?" And the boy says, "I don't know." But on the second image, we have a picture of the dog to go with the word that's written, dog. And she says, "What does it say?" And the boy says, "Dog." Now, this is important because when kids are reading, or if they're reciting, or if they're just saying words of pictures that they see, it looks exactly the same as if they're reading. And if their main way of figuring out what words are inside of a text is by looking at contextual clues, such as like pictures, and then saying dog, this is a compensatory strategy. It's what kids do when they're not reading, but it looks like reading, and people mistake it for reading even because it looks exactly the same. And so, to discuss what compensatory strategies are in more detail and what entrenchment and the reading disabilities are, let's talk about what it is to be successful at reading. So, the path to reading success. If a kid goes through these different stages of reading, this is called the development of reading. So things that are developmentally appropriate for reading to get to that level. You have 5 stages essentially. So one would be phonemic proficiency. This is the kid able to hear sounds and to be able to play with those sounds, so that as they're going through and decoding words, that they're able to think of each sound individually and be able to manipulate it. And if they're able to do that, then it means that they're able to file sounds around within their mind in a way that's required to be able to read complex words or even just basic words. Are they able to look at the letters and associate those with sounds and then put those back together in order to read words? So we have phonemic proficiency. Can they do that? And then you have the next stage would be automatic sound symbol correspondence. When they see a letter like the letter K, do they immediately say K? Do they know that that sound associate immediately with K? And can they do that with all of the letters in the alphabet and the sounds that correspond to them? When they see QU, do they say Qu? All right. Do they see when they see AW, do they automatically say ah? So those would be the general sound symbol correspondences, and those need to be automatic. If they're not automatic, the kid's not really ready developmentally to move on to the next stage, which is the automatic application of phonics rules. The phonics rules kind of go deeper than sound symbol correspondence. So um, what do the letters and sequences do? So again, if you have like um, CAT says cat, but if you have a word like capability, the A says A. And there's phonics rules for syllabication that will tell us that in closed syllables, the A says a, but in open syllables, the A says its name. It says A. So can they automatically apply these phonics rules? Once they're able to do that, then they can do orthographic analysis, which means to be able to look at words and, despite their irregularities, be able to understand what the words are doing. Like the word about. The letter A in about says and the kid needs to be aware that that's something that can happen, that vowels, no matter what the letter is, can have this schwa sound when they're pronounced. And so orthographic analysis, and then the orthographic mapping, which comes from that. When they're able to associate immediately the particular spelling of a word and the sounds that it creates in the word, so that they get to a point where they don't actually need to spend cognitive resources on decoding and thinking about the sounds one by one. They look at the word and they already have associated the pronunciation of that particular word. So they look at about and they don't sound it out like about, but they see it and they say about. That's called orthographic mapping. And are they able to do that with enough words that their cognitive resources are freed up to attend to meaning? All right. If kids are decoding every single word that they come across in a text, then they're not able to have the cognitive resources left over to be able to attend to the meaning. And as they do that automatically, then they're going to have fluency. Now let's talk about neurological entrenchment really quickly. If we do all these things and the kids go through these the stages of development. And after the first stage, the other ones can come kind of together. Like they won't, you don't need to go from one to the next to the next. They kind of bleed into each other in certain ways. But this is the general trend from phonemic proficiency to automatic sound symbol correspondence to automatic application of phonics rules to sufficient orthographic mapping and then fluency. So, neurological entrenchment is each time one of these skills is practiced, the skill builds upon a neural pathway which reinforces the skill. So the more that they attend to the sound symbol correspondence, the more automatic it becomes. They don't have to look at the word and think about it. It's not knowledge anymore. It becomes automatic. Think about riding a bike. We have declarative knowledge, like in order to ride a bike, you need to put your feet on the pedal and pedal. If you don't pedal, you'll fall over. And we learn that, but eventually it becomes second nature, that we know we need to keep pedaling or else we fall down. And then we don't think about it. We just ride a bike pleasurably. Okay, same thing happens with reading. So each time one of these skills is practiced, the skill builds upon a neural pathway which reinforces the skill. Declarative knowledge becomes automatic. Each instance of practice strengthens the neural pathways. These neural pathways get stronger and stronger the more we practice them. They become more and more automatic. And when this happens in an appropriate way, you get eventually fluent reading. So after years, especially during the critical period of development, these skills become deeply entrenched foundations of the cognitive system. And so imagine looking at the word about, if you're a fluent reader, about, and then now having to think about, oh, I need to pronounce each sound in this word. It becomes actually kind of hard to do because you're so used to this word, it automatically pops into your head that breaking it down into the sounds and trying to decode it is actually kind of strange to do. It's odd. It's no longer natural. You don't need to do that. So once these skills are entrenched, it's not like second nature, it's like first nature. It's the natural way of perceiving these things. And so imagine trying to now go back and decode every word you see. It just becomes odd and unnatural. So once entrenched, these habits are very difficult to disrupt. Now let's go on to points of failure. Phonemic proficiency. If a child starts reading and they don't have correct phonemic proficiency, it's going to be hard for them to be able to go on to the next stage of sound symbol correspondence. They have trouble thinking about sounds and hearing the differences between, say, and I. If that's troublesome for them, they're going to have a hard time with sound symbol correspondence. Okay. And if they're not automatic with sound symbol correspondence, they're going to have to be using a lot of cognitive resources to apply phonics rules. And if you can't apply phonics rules, you're going to have a hard time in orthographic analysis, looking at irregular words or just any word and thinking about the sounds in order. And so these failures will cascade. So if you don't have phonemic proficiency and you go straight to orthographic mapping and orthographic analysis, you're not going to have the tools capable of doing it. Now let's talk about the psychology of the child real quick. One, kids are instructionally naive. When you have a kid who's looking at a picture and sees the word dog and they say dog, they might think that they're reading, even if they didn't look at the letters D-O-G and they said dog. What they understand is what reading is. They see their parents do it. They look inside of a book and they say words. And those words correspond to the whatever's on the page. So whether that's the letters, which to a totally instructionally naive kid who doesn't know the alphabet, it would seem that looking at the pictures and saying what the pictures are doing, that's reading. So they're instructionally naive. They're also very logical. Kids, though naive, will work on assumptions and then use their hypotheses and go to the next level. You can look into direct instruction in Siegfried Engelmann. He talks a lot about how logical kids are, that if they misapprehend something, if they misunderstand, they mislearn it, they will apply the mislearned logic into the next thing, and it causes confusion. Kids want to succeed is the third part. Kids don't like to look stupid in front of their friends. They don't want to say that they don't know how to read or they don't know how to do things. They want to succeed. So they're going to do whatever they can to get the right answer. They want to see the teacher smile. So when they are reading a book, say looking at pictures and say the word dog, they look up and they see a smile. They're happy with that. They feel like they've succeeded. Even if the task itself was reading, but again, they're instructionally naive, and so they don't maybe understand what reading is. And so just getting the right answer is what they think reading is. Okay. So again, if you have these points of failure, they don't have phonemic proficiency. This is the number one thing. A lack of phonemic proficiency is essentially what dyslexia is. All right. If we went through the definition, kids who are dyslexic have phonological awareness deficits, and these deficits make reading really hard for them. They need extra special care with developing phonemic proficiency, and from there to developing sound symbol correspondence and the phonics rules. Okay. But again, if you have a kid with phonemic proficiency issues who is not dyslexic, or even a kid who has perfect phonemic proficiency, but they don't go through the path to reading success, it could be that they get tripped up and they will find other ways to succeed. All right, back to the psychology of the kids. Kids want to succeed above all. So if they're not able to do these things in the path to reading success, they will develop what are called compensatory strategies. And when kids are unable to succeed by means of the instruction, they will find another way. One, they will guess based on pictures if available. If they have a picture in the book, instead of going through the letters, say in the word dog, D-O-G, they'll look at that, but they don't have automatic sound symbol correspondence. They don't have their phonics rules. So it becomes difficult for them to strugglingly go through the d, g. And if they don't have phonemic proficiency, that might not even be an option for them. They can't think of those sounds in isolation. So they're going to find another way to do it. They'll guess based on pictures, or say they're reading The Cat in the Hat. They're going to memorize the story and just recite it, which looks exactly like reading. It looks exactly like fluent reading, in fact. But they will guess based on rhyme and rhythm. They'll also guess based on logic. I'm reading the story. For example, this happened with me with a kid. He was reading a sentence and it said, Tom was cold, so he put on his jacket. And I told him, oh, what was that last word? He said, jacket. And I said, could you spell that for me? And so he looked in the book and he saw the word C-O-A-T. And I was like, what is that word? And he said, I don't really know, but I think it means jacket. And I said, why do you think that? He said, well, there's a picture and it's snowing outside and this is Tom and he's putting on a jacket. And so I think the word is jacket. And that's very logical. If you don't know the word, you can look at the context. And so kids are smart and they can do that. But also some teachers teach this, and it's becoming illegal in many states. It's illegal in 12 states to teach kids to guess based on context. But regardless of that, many teachers still do it. And yeah, that's another story. If they have failed in phonemic proficiency, automatic sound symbol correspondence, automatic application of phonics rules, they might guess based on the first letter of the word. Okay, they see a cat, and then they see the letter C, and they think about it, and they know the letter C says k, and so they'll say cat. And so if it works within the context, if it's logical, that might be a guess they have. They will guess based on the shape of the word. They've seen this word before, and it kind of looks like capability. The word is actually catapult, but it kind of looks like capability, so you might get the word capability instead of the word catapult. They will guess based on words that they heard earlier in the class. They know that we've been training on this certain word, and so they get to the word, and they don't attend to the letters because they have trouble with all the stages of the successful reader, and so they just say the word that they know that they heard earlier in class that's probably the right guess. And if the teacher says, yes, that's exactly right, and they said, great, I succeeded. And then they will attempt to memorize words visually. They will look at the word and they will, instead of attending to the certain letters, they'll just attend to the shape. All right. And if you look into my lesson on orthographic mapping, you'll understand that words are not memorized visually. All right. Orthographic memory is very different than visual memorization of words. The visual cortex is not very efficient at memorizing and cataloging words, and it gets confused. But once you have orthographically mapped a word, it's not visual. So look at that course if you're interested. Often these strategies go unnoticed because when successful, they look just like reading. And then again, many teachers are trained to teach kids these strategies. This is called the 3 cueing system, guessing words based on context. It was widely taught in the 60s and continues to this day, except for in places where it's now become illegal. only 12 states. In many states, it's still legal and still taught at teachers' colleges to teach kids the 3-cueing system to guess. To basically all these natural ways that they will figure out what words are if they're unable to do it actual reading. They will teach them explicitly to do this. And so you have the case where kids who maybe have perfect phonological awareness and they could do sound symbol correspondence and all the phonics, if they're taught to guess words instead of to decode, then they will develop the same compensatory strategies, and this will lead to entrenchment. So again, every time they practice guessing based on pictures, guessing based on rhyme and rhythm, guessing based on logic, guessing based on the first letter of the word, guessing based on the shape of the word, guessing based on words they already heard in class, or visual memorization, every single time they practice that, you get neurological practice, which leads to neurological entrenchment. And that means the primary mode of perceiving words. And so again, I'm going to read this. Each time one of these skills is practiced, the skill builds upon a neural pathway which reinforces the skill. Declarative knowledge becomes automatic. Each instance of practice strengthens the neural pathways. After years, especially during the critical period of development, these skills become deeply entrenched foundations of the cognitive system. It is not like second nature, it is like first nature. Once entrenched, these habits are very difficult to disrupt. So the same processes when we went through in an appropriate way of learning reading, the same processes of neurological entrenchment to successful reading also apply with these compensatory strategies. They become neurologically entrenched and they become very difficult to disrupt. In fact, you can't retrain the brain not to see this way. They will still see this way as their primary means. So what reading remediation is giving them a competing neural pathway, which will always be secondary cognitively. Their primary critical period development leads them to these compensatory strategies. And now you have to reteach them in order to read in an appropriate way. And it will not always be successful depending on the age of the child. So a child who's been practicing this for 15 years and finally gets remediation, because of neuroplasticity, they are able to learn this correct way of reading, but it's always going to be in competition with this entrenched primary mode of guessing words. So how do we avoid neurological entrenchment of compensatory strategies? 1. Ensure your child is phonemically proficient. Administer the PASS test. Go to www.thepasstest.com. This is written by Dr. David Kilpatrick. It's free. You can learn how to do it in about an hour, and you can administer this kid and find out if they're susceptible to reading disabilities. So if they have poor phonological awareness or they have deficits in phonological awareness, they need to do that before they get their sound symbol correspondence and they get their phonics. All right. Otherwise, they're going to be driven to compensatory strategies. 2. Follow the science of reading scope and sequence of reading instruction. They need to have phonological awareness to be able to move on to sound symbol correspondence, which is going to help them with phonics, which is going to help them with orthographic analysis. And then as they entrench these good skills through practice, they're going to be successful readers. But if they don't have that phonological awareness in the beginning, everything else is going to crumble and they're going to develop compensatory strategies, which will entrench with practice. 3, according to the science of reading, also, all instruction should be explicit. Don't force the child to guess and make misapprehensions. Don't put them in the habit of guessing words. Show them the word, and depending on their development, if they have phonics, we can break it down through understanding the phonics. But don't force them to guess, because it will lead to misapprehensions, and it also reinforce that natural inclination for them to guess anyway, because reading is kind of tough. To go through and develop automaticity on all these skills takes time, and kids would really just like to get the right answer. So don't encourage that. Number 4, and this is maybe going to be a shocking one, never give emergent readers picture books. Don't give them rhyming books or even storybooks until they have an appropriate level of ability in phonics. And then give them decodable readers at the appropriate level. Leveled readers are different than decodable readers. Leveled readers say, at the end of first grade, kids should be able to read this. So we'll put all these words in here and expect that they'll just be able to read that. Decodable readers says, where are they at their level of phonics right now? if they have these phonics skills, we can employ those words within these storybooks. And they're decodable, so every single word is accounted for, and they should be able to read this and enjoy it. Whereas with leveled readers, a lot of those words are not appropriate for their phonics level, and they will guess. And then again, the part that is shocking, don't give picture books to kids to learn how to read, because they will use the pictures to guess words. Dr. Seuss, I would say, although there are books I'd like to read to my kids from Dr. Seuss, don't give them to your kids in order to learn how to read, because they are designed specifically to give you access to lots of contextual clues to guess what the words are. One, easily memorizable. You can memorize those stories and it looks the same as when they're reciting. It looks the same as reading. Two, they have pictures. All the pictures and all the sentences are accounted for within pictures in a very logical way. So you can look under the picture to figure out what those words are. And then also they have rhyming. And so you can guess based on the rhyme. The cat in the hat sat on the, not going to be floor, it's probably going to be the mat. And then if you have the picture there as well. All right, so you have the rhyming context, and then you have the context of the picture. And then the logical context is like, what is on the floor? Well, a mat. Okay, so those, Dr. Seuss is designed, and they really were designed to do this. This is back in the 1950s when they were working with the look-see method, which is a method designed not to teach phonics, but to get kids to be really good at recognizing words by their shape, by all sorts of contextual clues. So don't do it. How to recognize a child who relies on compensatory strategies? Well, number one is, if your child says, my teacher tells me to guess on words I don't know, that child is being taught to use compensatory strategies. Even if your child has phonemic awareness, which is appropriate to be able to learn how to read, and even if your child is not dyslexic, they can develop reading disabilities. The entrenchment of compensatory strategy is reading disability. So if your kid says, my teacher tells me to guess on words I don't know, you need to intervene immediately. You need to stop, because you do not want neurological entrenchment of bad reading skills and compensatory strategies. 2, often skips or misreads function words. Function words have no meaning. They just have functions. And so the words like the, for, to, from, basically all prepositions, and these little kind of words. Okay, not like cat, which has a meaning. You can think of what a cat is and you can picture it in your mind. You can't picture the. The doesn't have a meaning. So they often skip or misread these function words. Look for that. If they have that, they are probably having compensatory strategy problems, because they can't guess these words based on context. They'll see the word of and they'll say from, because both are logical in the context, but it means that they're guessing the context. So student looks away. Number 3, this is the most common thing I see as a reading remediation coach. Student looks away from the text when trying to figure out a word. They look up and to the left or to the right. And in neurolinguistic programming, they say when you look up and to the left or to the right, depending on handedness, that you are retrieving a visual memory. And so that means they're trying to visually memorize words, which is not a very good way of doing it, because your visual cortex can maybe memorize visually 200 or 300 words. But there's no reason to do it, because you can orthographically map the letters to the sounds. 4, the child cannot read unfamiliar words with regular spelling conventions. The word MUP, mup, JORK, jork. When you get further along, a word like disruptive is completely regular, according to our orthographic conventions. If they can't read those words, it means they're not very good at sounding out words. They're not very good at decoding, and it's definitely not automatic for them. A very strong reader will be able to read this just as easily as they could read any unrecognized real word that follows the regular conventions of spelling. Number 5, student becomes avoidant of reading, gets tummy aches during reading time. All right, these kids do not want to read, and they will do anything they can. They will even develop, what's it called when you have imagined physiological effects that are very real. Like, they'll have tummy aches, but that tummy ache is a psychological response to being asked to do something that makes them very uncomfortable. 6 is found to have poor phonological awareness from the past test. Okay, if your student has poor phonological awareness from the past test, you should you should stop. You should stop what you're doing. Go back and make sure they're remediated. It doesn't take very long to remediate a kid to develop good phonological awareness. 15 to 20 hours is sufficient for most kids, but it's direct and it's pretty easy to do once you know how to do it. But if they have poor phonological awareness, maybe stop whatever phonics level they're at or whatever reading that they're doing, and make sure that you're incorporating phonological awareness drills into any instruction you have. All right. And that's just to be very, very careful. If you find that they have poor phonological awareness, talk to an expert. Talk to somebody who does reading remediation. And that doesn't mean like a SPED teacher, special education teacher, because many of them don't know about this. They don't know about the science of reading. Again, a lot of the teachers' colleges teach the 3-cueing system, which is more and more becoming illegal, and the science of reading is becoming mandated across different states. So, conclusion is you should know what compensatory strategies are. You should know how damaging they are when they become neurologically entrenched. They make it literally so kids can't look at a word and decode it in an appropriate way and be able to then entrench that skill of proper decoding to become the good skill that leads to successful reading. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please, I would love to see it in the comments section. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.